I think it. I mean, I could just repeat
Sure.
mine to keep in people's minds because there. If it's not a problem, I had like a couple of questions to ask each of you, and if you have the time, maybe we could discuss that while people think about their
Yeah.
intervention or questions, if that's okay. But I'm sure people have their own questions. But my prompt was to think that in the context of research and investigation, as a mode of art making and curating, what place can we find for um, songs, for music, for movement, etc., to be uh, material testimony, material witness in some ways, right? So when Zermina, you were talking about, I think in Umar's practice, trees as witness, Zara and Shahana doing the same. There's also that genealogical connection because these are sort of ideas in Susan Shipley's work that come through into these practices where material somehow provides testimony, right? So my question really was how we can imagine doing that with immaterial or intangible objects. I mean, that's just a sort of broader workshop
Mhm.
question. Um, yeah, do you want to put up yours and then maybe we can have a little
Yeah,
chat amongst ourselves? Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure. Mine was essentially around, I mean, I think God, began with Okwi
Yeah.
and this idea of what is the space in which one can act, and
Hmm.
then expands that to the space of the exhibition. I mean, fully acknowledging that all of these works speak to ideas of public space, of being a citizen within a certain space, of uh, rights, of access, um, and how that affected by various kinds of conflicts, you could say, within that space. Um,
Hmm.
but what happens beyond addressing these within the space of an exhibition? So the art, I mean, these are all works that engage communities as well, particularly Zara, Shahana, Omar. Um, but beyond this, as a curator, beyond the space of that transient exhibition, how does the how does the curatorial endeavor become more than just this transient exhibition
Yeah.
space and become a kind of space of collectivity, collaboration, or solidarity, or care, or community?
Yeah. And Qudsia?
Yeah, I think at my end,
Okay, great.
and this is good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I think the sort of related sets of questions, not surprisingly. So, huh. So can I ask my questions, or which are not fully formed questions, but just thinking in relation to both your projects? Okay. Actually, I want to address, Zamina, your question of how can these forms of continue to uh, work to form solidarities, communities, care, and so on. Uh, what I've been finding really interesting recently, um, and I'm supervising some work around um, the internet and right wing sort of groups of people, right? Fascism, really, it's about fascism and meme culture. And there's some really fascinating things that I'm learning through supervision, which is one of the joys of that kind of work. But it occurs to me that there are really, really interesting mobilizations of community, subjectivity, um, and even care happening in this right wing fascist space, right? for each other. Therefore, everything that we say in community honi chahiye, solidarity honi chahiye, art mein, right? We're doing it through these means,
Yeah.
which, but at a very rapid pace and not in immediately visible ways. Uh, right-wing communities are forming around mobilizations of affect, right? Not around propositions that this is what society should be like, etc. They're forming around things like this is what makes you laugh. This is
Mhm.
what makes you feel angry or bad, right? And I mean, this is not a tiny thing because, in fact, in terms of what um, we spend our time on, this internet, the social media apps, everything we're doing, algorithmically is designed to measure our uh, affective responses, right? And it's breaking that up into data, it's quantifying it, and then throwing it back at us. And it becomes this kind of tightening loop. So, right wing communities, either by accident or by simple lack of overthinking it, have become involved in these communities, producing these communities. When we talk about young people joining certain causes, etc., fascist causes these days around the world, it's largely through this mobilization of affect, community, and care. So I guess the question I would say I would take your question and say how do we mobilize communities and solidarities which are non-fascist? I would say that that is actually a question uh, that I'd be interested to sort of move even further along with that. And I would say the same thing in relation to the notion of taksim, uh, right? कि तकसीम जो है, this division जो in Seema's work, you were talking in the context of Seema's work, right? It strikes me as that there's so many forms of taksim, so many iqsam of taksim, if you will forgive the pun, that especially in the way that we use this, right? हमारे यहाँ ऐसा है कि we have a biennial or a major work exhibition, which is again mobilized by funding and all sorts of important things. And the people, when we say that there's a community or a people that it helps, we have this kind of taksim of these other people who are outside the world of art, right? And they somehow will benefit from this interaction with this, which is quite an interesting, it's a very interesting phenomenon, I think. And then there's also the taksim of when we call something taksim and write कि उसका title हम लोग उर्दू में रखते हैं, which is I do this, you do this, मंजर है, तकसीम है, पर उसकी content फिर English में है.
Yeah.
Inside, that's another kind of taksim, right, that we are engaged in. So I'm just sort of, these are not questions. I'm just saying that these things are so intriguing in the way that they are forming particular publics, and
Mhm.
then they're sort of structuring how we address them as
Yeah.
well. So anyhow, these were not really questions, but just sort of expansions on your already interesting questions, I suppose.
So with Taksim, I think I was also at the time looking at Aisha Jalal and Wazira's work a
Yeah,
lot, and this idea of a continued partitioning, that
yeah,
the partition is not just that singular event in 1947, but is a continued sort of series of events that is that is in place until today. Um,
hmm,
so so yeah, absolutely, that can translate into, I suppose, all of the ways in which we are also engaging with that kind
yeah.
of yeah. I think, I'm going to turn my laptop around so you can see the people
That'll be nice.
here. And excuse me, this the projector goes off for a second. If it does mean, is
Huh.
that good?
Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Okay. And if anyone here has question or want to speak, you can stay there. Be able to hear you.
Joining.
So, shall we begin with any questions that people have? Whether online or in person, do we want to begin with that, or do we want to sort of begin with a particular set of questions?
I don't know about you, but I'm curious to hear what questions people have after hearing us go on for the last couple of hours.
And they don't have to be questions, they can also just be observations or thoughts.
I have a question. Since you're talking about continuation of the transient space,
Can you hear, Adnan? Yes.
is that, can it also take the form for new kind of music? Are you talking about a physical space? Are you talking about something out?
So who's that question for? Is that for Zabine, right?
I think it was for you, right? Wasn't it?
For any?
For anyone. Okay.
Yeah.
The question I think was that when we speak about
Continuation of the transient space, like
continuation,
how you make it solid or
oh, I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, so maybe that was for me where I was saying exhibitions that no, I don't necessarily mean that you make it in a museum. I mean I'm also, I mean, I'm in many ways perhaps questioning the form of the exhibition itself, whether that is you know, a 2 month exhibition or 2 year exhibition. In the case of like museums, you can also have permanent displays. But my question is not necessarily to do with the length of that exhibition, but to question what that exhibition does beyond simply putting forward these objects or material, you know, how does that sense of community that we speak about when we work together, collaboration that I talk about as a curator, or really these very serious concerns about publics and spaces and dispossession and injustice and, you know, all of this, how does that translate into something? Does the exhibition encompass all of this? And if it doesn't, then how, you know, is the exhibition the ideal form, right?
that to know how to content.
I mean, it's something I'm kind of throwing out there as something to think about, and you can disagree with that as well, right? You can say that you actually the exhibition is like
How do you raise the hand? How do you raise the hand?
You just raise your hand and
Oh.
read it. Otherwise,
I-
no, it actually does tap on the.
I'll also respond to
Yeah.
this question. I understand very little because there's again so much flag and otherwise issues, but this is something that we, you know, work with on regular basis, right? So what does an exhibition mean? And then the formality of that exhibition. We spend a lot of money in bringing these artworks, these public engagement, and then there is this need and sometimes this want, and then, you know, it can come from anywhere. It can come from the people, it can come from the government, it can come from us, it can come from just creating a transient exhibition every time. Just from that we also, you know, often wonder, and like I said, like this time around, we wanted to leave or work with some more permanent pieces because we felt that transient nature of these various conversations sometimes need to be need to engage more deeper, or if the conversation makes sense, um, the place wants to response the place's responses for it to stay. And we were not able to do much of that until, even now it's very difficult. It's very um laborious process of, um it's not laborious, I mean laborious, but I mean is like, for us it becomes a little problematic. I mean, I'm using these big words, they none of them fit here. What does fit here is that when we are trying to work in these places, we need, unless a project naturally blends into it and it absorbs so beautifully that it never it was always there, right? It is always an outsider work. So you come in, you work with ideas, you work with perspectives, you work with um concerns, and
Hmm.
Forensic architecture.
Yeah.
And there about aesthetic objects,
Mhm.
And I think that what I'm trying to ask is connected to that line of questioning.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for me, this question is really, I'm glad it's interesting and I can see the overlaps, because when you're curating or putting together works that uh, make a claim on some form of justice, right? They're making a claim, and we have to think about what that claim is. Um, to what extent is that claim mediated through an aesthetic response? Um, how does that take place? I'm fascinated by what are the mechanics of that. Um, and does that in fact, I mean, now this is the obscene question, because does that in fact lead to some kind of further process or afterlife of the work, right? Because in that traditional aesthetic encounter with the work of art, um, it's supposed to be just that person in the gallery or museum at that moment, um, and at best we hope that they get transformed somehow, morally transformed, and then maybe in their life something changes, right? Um, but I'm also interested in how it's got nothing to do with individual intentions at all. Because if we think of Guernica, it has an afterlife. There's a tapestry that was made, a replica tapestry of it that hangs in the UN, right? And at the time of the first Gulf War, it was hanging behind, or was going to hang behind the US General Colin Powell when he was announcing uh, the Iraq invasion, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and they had it covered up with a curtain. Right? There's this very interesting moment where they had to cover it up. For me, that's actually the more interesting part, story of what happens with that particular work. That in some way it functions as a kind of collective, an object of collective shame, right? There's shame in front of saying, in front of this work, in front of these images, I cannot say it in front of this guy, I'm going to attack this country, right? So it's perverting. So in fact, there's a whole legal moral discourse of the just war, right? International law is built around allowing just wars to take place. So how do we justify that sometimes we have to go and kill lots of people? That's where international law steps in. So suddenly this painting makes it impossible to even call onto that tradition, right? So it's disrupted actually an entire, many thousands of years old developing Roman tradition of legal international law, just by being there in the background and then by having that curtain on top of it. So these things, I think, are what require us to extend our definition of the aesthetic encounter uh, further, right? Beyond that, मुझे देख के दिल में सुकून हुआ या कुछ बेचैनी आई, या any of these personal things which are also part of it, but it's not just there. anyhow, that was my idea of it. Also, I mean, I do have something, if we've got a second, to say about transience as well, because it's something that I've discussed with various people in Pakistan over the years. Because हमारे यहाँ, as Kutsi was pointing out, कि situations बहुत specific हैं of what can be said and done and what can be exhibited, uh, which is anywhere in the world, but ours are fairly specific to us. Um, Transience is such a great weapon in those situations, right? You say something and you run. By the time people come to check on ये क्या हो रहा है यहाँ, सब कुछ बंद है और सब लोग भाग गए. And I like that as a mode of one mode of exhibition making. I think it's quite useful. Um, it's got something of the joy of the rave of the sort of illicit meeting happening there. So I think there are other models to think about rather than simply making structures permanent. It's possible to make structures of feeling uh, last longer. So anyhow, that was. It's also related to Huck, right? Huck Jo, which Spivak talks about. How does Huck work in the case of that ultimate Parisiastes? Is the ultimate one is, of course, Al-Hallaj, right? Mansur Al-Hallaj speaks truth, but he is speaking truth in a way that he wants to die for it. He's already decided not only that he wants to die, but how he'll die, because he's already said, I want to be crucified like Christ for transgression, right? So, but that's not the only route, I think, right? But this is the problem with mobilizing Haq, that we might say कि जब तक मर नहीं जाए बोलते हुए तो कोई फायदा नहीं. We have to think also ways of saying something at a risk and escaping. But anyhow, that's a different. I know you like your Deleuze. So Deleuze talks about running away, but picking up a stone while you're running away, right? You run away, but you pick up a weapon as you run. Anyhow, that's my that I'm going to shut up there about this thing, because there are questions I can see coming in.
That being Navina, are you there? You are on mute.
Alaikum everyone. My question is for all of you, especially Kutsia Rahim, that I've seen that in Karachi Binale and in Lahore Binale, when the planner is going around, there is no certain opportunity for the upcoming curators. Is there any plan for future, or is there any kind of idea that will happen around? Because that's really helpful for the the artist. And I've seen the galleries are collaborating, but I haven't seen the curators itself as an entity or curator like participating in binales.
Hi, I'm going to try. Let me. Absolutely, absolutely. We have a year-round calendar of activities and events, and we send out open calls all the time. A biennial is also designed around some of the projects where artists act as a curator or curated elements are part of it. Um, we also think that for a plural world, we also want collateral events around us, because we don't want the biennial to be the only thing in the world that's happening at that time, in that moment, and other people don't get their opportunity. So so last biennial we were only 60 people, right? 60 artists who were invited. So imagine if because a biennial is an international event, right? It needs to have an international audience. So we say 50% international, 50% local, and then we start I mean, we don't have a quota system, but I mean, think about how many people, 30 people. And in that 30 people, the artist, the curator has certain people that they want to invite, certain people they want to leave room for chance, and discovery with their research, those kind of things. So there's always very limited space for young, aspiring, and sometimes mid-career people. And with each biennial, what happens, because the themes are so different one from the other, certain people who may not be applicable for each because of their work, the concentration of their work, they don't necessarily their work doesn't align because they're talking about different things and the curator's looking at different concerns. So in that case, what happens is that we there's always a room for the next edition, right? The new curator will come with new concerns. We'll look at a different set of people, artists, to engage with artists and other disciplinary practices as well. So to mitigate that we are not able to bring a lot of conversation or include the young professionals, the young curators around us, we ask them to create collateral events that we advertise alongside with the biennial. And everyone is invited to the time when we invite the curator, we invite the city also to respond to this subject. So it's not only artists and curators, there are people from other fields as well. So we saw that at the time the biennial, LUMS did something, for example, or Beacon House University, we worked with them so another way that we engage is that we work with various institutions, and then the students and the faculty also gets to engage with them, and they can then choose to invite other young professionals and along with that particular work. So we work with 9 institutions in Pakistan. So Gujarat and Jamshoro and Punjab University, and then of course the क्या कहते हैं NCA and Beacon House University. तो हम हर साल काम करते हैं उनके साथ. And Canade College, I think, was very nice to work with, all girls college. You saw some of the examples from there as well. So we try and engage with them in different ways, in different formats, in different capacities. To curate a biennial itself is a Herculean job. And it's a very complex machine. It's a very complex concept. And to engage, maybe one day the format would be that all the young curators and aspiring curators are invited to create like a whole lot of work around it. So maybe that can also happen. But generally, it's a mature curator who can actually bring mature conversations and invite young aspiring artists and mid-season artists and seasoned artists. I mean, that's what we generally hope for. But each biennial do have, students, young graduates, mid-career. We make sure that we gender neutral, those kind of things. I think these things are very important to us. So we make sure that they're addressed in every biennial for us. And if you saw the last biennial, there were over 50 collateral events alongside with the biennial. So, I mean, in that capacity, everybody who came to see the biennial, or people who came from domestic, people who traveled, they also came to see all the collateral events. So in that ways, the galleries, formal, informal, both. So, I mean, like, I know so many people who just create a collateral event along the side of the biennial, and they don't have a gallery, but people come together and curate things. And I think that's the best form of, where you create something that you like, and gaps where you see concerns that are you moved by, and then bring that into parallel with the rest of the world, parallel with the biennial, parallel with your other collateral events. And I think that's the best form of building a bottom-up kind of approach in which everybody is equal. The biennial is competing with everybody else who's curating, and that's the kind of space we like. So it's not about exclusive to one person or we bringing art to the public. We are working with, everybody is working on it together, and we all are participants, and but there are certain areas we want these gaps to be filled. We want democratization through art. We want these spaces to get occupied. So those things are important to us, and we're working towards them. I hope that answers your question.
Then,
Yes.
Hi there, and thank you so much, Zermina, Adnan, and Kitsia for the talks. They were really quite enjoyable. And from the discussions, I really was inspired by the different the exhibition examples that you gave, and your work in the Biennale, Kitsia, and also the sort of theories you were talking about, Adnan, about sort of forensic investigation and the curator as a sort of effector as well. Sometimes the ways you've described the work that the curator is doing, it seems like they're an advocate, they're a protester. But I was also wondering if there's space in talks about justice for the curator to act as a caretaker or as a sort of community organizer. So, I'm thinking about marginalized communities, and how from within those curators can come in as an effector, sort of listening to the concerns, the ideas, the sometimes sort of heterodox ideas that might not fit in with sort of sort of, like norms in society, whether that be Pakistan or otherwise, and then curate exhibitions that can speak to those and therefore have that added level of legitimacy as well. I was particularly thinking about Breathe Lahore and how that was torn down and how that could have, I don't know, if there was a curatorial decision making somewhere there that could have made that a lot more validated with its community. But I just put that there.
You see, that was a space I wanted to occupy, a space
Yes,
that
exactly.
boundaries that I did want to break, which is why I brought that piece over there. So, NCN and the surrounding areas also synonymous to conservative views and conservative ideas or conservative ways of thinking. So maybe I was being the protagonist here by placing those artworks over there, by seeing how far I can push. I can push the boundary to see how far I can go. I mean, it survived till the end of the exhibition. So we kind of happy at that. But there was something I was saying, and I think we got disconnected. So the conversation went all the way, like different people in the government also noticing that thing getting torn, because working in public space, you can't work without the government. When I was working on that project, bringing that project to Lahore was a risky thing for me to do also, because it has, although it talks about in environment and talks about air quality, straight on, but it has, certain elements to it, which I was not sure whether would be received well or not. So while the good part is that the government supports us and we don't have to get anything approved by them, or we don't have to show and get justification or those kind of things. That's the best part. But in this case, I did go to the government and I said, I'm really interested in this artwork in public space. How do I respond to it? This artwork was showing on billboards throughout the city. Some of them were giant billboards. So these are so the way Dryden works, it's a composite of 200 drawings that he makes of a sitter when he's breathing distress, right? And so it is incredibly powerful and incredibly important also, because in some capacity we know somebody who's had a COVID or has some kind of respiratory ailment. I mean, Lahore for sure, right? Because I mean, the conditions are so bad. Last year, the AQI went up to 1,000, right? So having this work was very important for me. I remember, when they were being torn down, somebody asked me to respond to it. Madam, what do you want to do about it? And I said, what do you think we should do? And they said, okay, the people are responding, let them respond. This is the response to the work. They're not being harsh. And for me, that was good. That was important. That's the life of the work. For this particular work, for this particular engagement, style of engagement, this was the outcome. And I happily accept it because the people have spoken. I mean, the people who use that space have spoken. And I was the outsider, but I was definitely the protagonist also in this case. So the other part of your question was marginalized communities and care being given or space being given to them. I think this is another area that is very, very important to us. And if you saw this biennial, especially the past biennial, there were a couple of, again, risks that we took. We take a lot of risks. We try and push, right? You will see I don't want to say too much because at the end of the day, this conversation is to go online. So you will see all kinds of artists in this, especially this edition. And you would be happy to see them. I mean, there were lots of risks that I took by inviting them. But somebody has to do that, right? And it's easy to do in a biennial because there's so many artists, they get the larger groups protection. Because when you're bringing these delicate voices, you have to give them protection also, or better not touch them. If you cannot give them protection, it is best to leave them and come back to them when you are ready, but not leave them in isolation or single them out. Because foundations, big institutions can take a lot of pressure. I mean, at one time, there's not a single moment I'm not under pressure, but I can take that pressure because organizations can, and therefore it is their duty. What you just spoke about, taking care of the marginalized communities and giving them voices and finding ways, creative ways to bringing them into the conversations. I think these parts are very important, and I take these things very seriously.
Yeah. Thanks, Zen. That's that's a really good question, and it's something that I do think about quite a lot. I suppose my answer is, oh, you'd be surprised that it's a little convoluted. It's because I think that the bits of caretake, of course, that's there. Care, curating, these are all related concepts, right? And it's had a sort of revival in the last few years around an emphasis on care in the social turn, as it was called recently. What interests me in particular, now this is my view on it is partial because I can speak about what I'm interested in. I'm interested in situations of care that require um, rather than appealing to a public court or opening up. I'm interested in those situations where you have to hide something or where you have to perhaps even destroy something to care for it, right? These are, for me, fascinating situations, right? कि किसी चीज को अगर बचाना है in a situation, if you want to preserve it, this is a situational problem, of course, right? That you might have to throw something over it, you might have to conceal it, rather than rather than always open it up. I'm not saying that that's not valid. I'm saying I'm interested in those particular spaces for what they tell me about a given place. I, if as you're saying this, I'm thinking about why that might be the case without making it a kind of a personal response or a psychoanalytic navel gazing response. There are two exhibition histories, I think, that run side by side in the European tradition that we mostly follow of thinking about exhibitions in museums, right? At the end of the 1700s, you have the French Revolution takes over the Louvre, and they take over these aristocrats' buildings, and they say, Jacques Louis David and people say, no, right, these treasures, these vulgar, garish, horrible works of art that are made at the expense of these people, they need to be displayed to everyone, not as a display of luxury anymore, but as a place of education, right? Not just education in how beautiful these things are, but also in how evil some of these objects are in being this excess of wealth and luxury. That's a minor tradition because it went away very quickly as an aspiration. The major tradition was that of the British Museum, then the Natural History Museums, Victoria and Albert, these sort of major museums, which at the same time were developing into museums of art and then museums of anthropology and ethnology. It's not a surprise. Now, this is really where I'm getting to the point of what I'm saying, is that we think we cannot work under the assumption that art and exhibition and making public and producing a public through art are necessary for our existence, right? This sounds paradoxical because very often we have to fight for, can we please pass it there, we need this. But really, they're not necessary for a given society. In fact, I would say that you find the culture of exhibition making and museums, and the contemporary notion of art that we are left with, you really find it developing at the peak of the most bloodthirsty societies this world has ever produced, right? 19th, 18th, 19th century colonialism produces not just the map of the world as we see it today and all the atrocities going on within it, but to support and defend that, they produce the notion of the exhibition and the museum as places where populations learn to govern themselves. They learn to govern themselves because they aesthetically aspire to or engage with and sympathize and empathize with the world of people who are far more powerful than them, who happen to be benevolent enough. Okay, yeah, you can come and see some of my art. Brilliant, right? So so I suppose what I'm saying is that I'm interested in places where curating fails, where making visible or appealing to conventional justice is disastrous or fraught with risk, and then thinking of tactics rather than overarching themes, tactics of getting around that. So I suppose that's my way of thinking about care. What is it that we're caring about? What is it that we're caring about? Precisely. So I want to, yeah, anyhow, that's, as I said, it's a slightly longish answer, but my notion of care is more related to invisibility and yeah.
That's all. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I think the idea of care is interesting in how it manifests. So where, Kutsia and I were having these conversations initially was a little by and this was curated by Kanasilia Wambwa, and it was called Umoya, the Sacred Return of Lost Things. And very much the words used within that were healing, care, breadth. There was a certain series of words or a certain type of words that were used. But the exhibition itself, the biennial, sitting in confronts Liverpool's history with the Atlantic slave trade. And Khan Celia is, Black curator from South Africa, and speaks a lot about ancestral knowledge and history and memory. And so, this idea that care is also through confrontation, which leads to healing and which leads to care. So I think that's also, how do we interpret the word care when it comes to action? So can care does it, can it sort of rub against things that cause friction and therefore allow for a kind of care to happen? So I think just, like how do we interpret the word care and then how does it manifest our state?
Yeah, it's complex, right? It's much more complex than just reconciliation and getting along okay. And this is something we all instinctively know, and we need to think about it in more nuanced ways in curating, right? Because when we talk about healing, we don't need to heal everything. We don't need to heal everything. I'm boycotting something that's happening right now in our university context, which is about healing Palestine and Israel. What a ridiculous concept! What a ridiculous concept, right? You don't heal in the middle of a confrontation. You don't sit back and say, "Okay, aapne zakham bhar do." And this is, as they say, the conversation between the neck and the sword. It's not something which. So there are situations which demand something other than healing, where care can be opening a wound, right? Care can be making sure it doesn't heal, right? So this is anyhow. There are questions, by the way. There are also questions on the chat.
No, so you can order, just you can be ordered. Shamama, yes, there are questions in the chat. Shamama is just going to speak and then maybe we can get them.
I just want to respond to the something said Adnan earlier. You identified that we do tend to use Urdu words when we're titling things, right? I also do that with my own. If presenting the content, it is in English, most of it, our expression, analysis, all of these things are used. So I do think that in this sense, care, the idea of care would be to be, for lack of a better word, brave enough or reckless enough to stick with Urdu, in our academic context even, or in exhibition spaces, gallery spaces, especially because it is uncomfortable. We're not used to it, and it does come with a lot of shame for students, for audiences, larger audiences, when they're not able to understand English, speak in English, write in English, read in English, respond in English. I think that's like one place where we can start when we're thinking about curating all of the different activities. Dusri work has something with what Zarvini were asking about the exhibition space है उसके beyond कैसे चलता. तो इन दोनों senses के अंदर मुझे फीलिंग आ रही है वो ये है कि accessibility का थोड़ा सा issue है. Accessibility का बहुत बड़ा issue. और उसके अंदर जब हम interdisciplinarity की बात करते हैं तो I think वो भी थोड़ा सा missing होता है. वो जरूरी है because उससे फिर हमारी चीजें ना हमारी spaces beyond the art circle just. So when we bring in, so for example, when we have exhibitions regarding a certain theme or an event or whatever, उसके अंदर जब panel discussions हमारे होते हैं, we have a very particular group of artists who are talking about it, right? gatekeeping भी उसमें आ जाता है, but also like imagining an alternative, right? कि अगर जिस तरह for example अगर अदील सुलेमान का artwork है उसके ऊपर social issue या group exhibition है, तो उसका जो panel discussion होता है उसमें will respond. What if we bring in people जो कि जो affected communities or people like lawyers or institution workers who work in those areas, why are they not on those panel discussions, right? ताकि वो जो conversation है वो थोड़ी सी expand हो beyond just this space, this circle, and also that we could maybe use these exhibition spaces as places to connect these different industries in a way. You know, how we can use these spaces not have advertised करते for people who are interested in, contributing to it, learning from it, participating in these things, or with these different organizations, young people who get a chance to practice or connect or whatever. And I think that could be a way in which we can sort of expand.
Yeah.
So I'm also very interested if curation and exhibition spaces can also be seen as pedagogical spaces.
Of course, yeah.
And so there's if you could expand.
Adnan, did you hear that? Kutsia,
No,
did
that
you
was
guys hear?
breaking. This last bit was breaking up a little bit. Could you repeat that, Zermina, since you're closer to the?
The idea that exhibitions or the act of curating or spaces of curating can also be pedagogical spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Kutsia will be able to speak to that. Oh, sorry, was there something else?
No, just that they were just saying that since we are all within the academic field as well, how does one view sort of curatorial space
Well,
of curating as
Yeah, absolutely. I
also-
mean, I think that's something that that is something that I'm invested in to an extent. The idea of the curatorial as the pedagogic space primarily, right? To some extent, in fact, I would say that uh, it might be the balance might be wrong for me because I tend to think of the objects as a ruse or a disguise to get in the actual discussions or the things that happen pedagogically in those spaces, right? Okay, objects to हैं वहाँ चीजें बन रही हैं, but that's what is the lure. It brings you into that space. So I do think that the pedagogic space of curating is, for me, one of the most interesting things that happens, not in terms of telling people this or that, but as I said, in terms of the mobilization of affects, of how people connect to things in the most unexpected ways, right? Not directly, because nothing that we do, and this is, if psychoanalysis and psychology has taught us anything, and I think it's taught us very little, but it's taught us that we don't actually connect to things in the way that they want us to connect to them, right? So it's always a slightly crazy process. Curating, I think, means sort of hosting those crazy connections in some ways. So yeah, that's the answer to the pedagogical thing, and Kutsia will have more to say about that, I'm sure. But in answer to the Urdu question, yeah, I mean, this comes up, right at the beginning of the history of Pakistan. We had all the language issues, right? Is it going to be Urdu? Is it going to be Bengali? Is it going to be Punjabi, Sindhi, etc.? And this still happens when we talk about Urdu as a lingua franca or as a medium of education or dissemination. Then, of course, the question is, why Urdu? Urdu is also, in some ways, a colonial language, right? In many parts of Pakistan. But I think this is a slightly distracting question because, again, to quote the person that Zermine was quoting, Michel Foucault, he talks in this fabulous essay called "What Is Critique." He ends it with this notion of to not be governed thusly, to not be governed in this way, not He's saying that what we're trying to do is to not be governed in this particular way. It's not no government, nothing at all. Is that we are fighting against this one. Oh, abhi jo imposition hai, the one that is the most clear imposition, I think, is that of the English language, which is an enormously divisive uh, force in in our country. Not only that, but it is literally the agent in charge of reproducing repression, right? And sometimes even in the form of this theory that we're talking in, very often. And I'm very aware of this. So this is a bind that we find ourselves in, that the very language of liberation that we're using can itself become a tool of oppression, because if I can speak this language, then I have authority, right? So yes, there is an enormous task to be done to bring languages and access, and not just in terms of access to Durgi Bata. I think just in terms of exploring the tremendous possibilities inherent in languages, it's the most exciting thing. Why is it not happening? I've suggested this before in Pakistani context, although I haven't built on it, that I would be happy to work with people on some sort of rapid translation bureau, just sit down for a day and translate a text badly. Do it badly. You don't have to spend, British Council say grant leke 10 saal apni kitab ko translate kiya. No, just get on with it. By the way, early days of Pakistan, this is what did used to happen. PTV, Pakistan Radio used to do this. They used to have a week of plays. They had to fill content. There was no content, right? So they had to translate things literally overnight. A Shakespeare play translated in 2 nights, acted the next day. This is, I think, what we do need. An experiment, an artistic and curated experiment in imagination and language, not replace English with Urdu, etc. Just do it, set it up. Anyhow, that's my answer to that. But Kutia will have more to say, no doubt, about both these things and their immediate considerations in the Biennale.
The short answer is, especially for the Urdu English situation, is that the world is a different place now. Like we have now French and Italian and Urdu part of English and those kind of things. I don't take this as something like that's very divisive. I mean, like these things don't bother me at all. I think it shouldn't bother anybody. Post-colonial, Urdu itself is amalgamation of like 10 million languages, right? So in today's world, the French are speaking Italian, I mean, where the languages are also very similar, but whatever works, if that makes sense to you, and this is the perspective that you're coming from, and you would like to mix languages, please, by all means. I think they're not hindrances. Well, what Adnan spoke about, I take that a little bit more seriously in the sense that when you stop writing in your own language, there's a big problem in that. And we saw that like 10 years ago. We're talking about Adnan talking about the rapid fire and trying to translate. I was translating English text into Urdu. I was writing the press releases in Urdu because we had taken up this responsibility that we were going to be bilingual, or whatever language we need to adopt to say what we need to. So in that capacity, what was happening was that we were working very fast. There were no translators available. Today, luckily, so much of work is happening in Urdu. So much of original content is happening in Urdu, which is amazing. We didn't know what installation meant at that time in Urdu. We didn't. Nobody did. So we were working with people like Musharraf Ali Faruqi, and we were working, other whoever I could come up with. My father-in-law, I'm asking, Iftikhar Dadi, I'm asking everybody. I mean, we all are sitting and translating these texts, which meant what we were trying to do, but not necessarily an exact translation. And I don't think that ever mattered to us. So I think the content in our language, clearly, like what you're saying, of course, I understand what you're saying on English and those kind of things. I don't want to refute that. But I personally think what makes you comfortable, helps you get your idea forward. That's perhaps the most important thing, being true to your content. Regarding the pedagogical tool, I think this whole exercise that we're trying to do over here is because the three of us believe in this very strongly. And we see that around us. And all the examples that were given today were examples of work that had a version of knowledge gathering, knowledge collection, and working through knowledge. If you saw the last example that I was trying to show of Park Tea House and the way we're trying to engage with the Sunday book market and that space, the amount of research that has gone just getting the project to the place where it is. And, if there's a certain plant that needs to be used, what's the genealogy of it? Where is it coming from? Is it indigenous? If it is, connected with what kind of constructs is it connected with? Those kind of things, all kinds of learning behind it. So that's just an example of one of the artworks we are working towards, right? But this is what we do for every single project that we work on. So, for example, this past Biennale, we worked with the kite makers, right? I mean, that's yet another way of creating pedagogical, using your work as a pedagogical tool, and then using that into practice, and then learning from it and reapplication of that knowledge, right? So we try to sever the act of kite flying or the politics of kite flying to the paper craft itself. We have some fantastic craftsmen who work on making these kites throughout the year for Basant. But since Basant is banned, and other cities, some also, they have some version of Basant, but Lahore is like completely banned and was the place to come for kite flying, right? Even if you go to the shop to buy that paper, you can be put on jail. Or if you are selling that paper, you can put on jail. If you go to the shop to buy that type of bamboo that with the vein that you make the kite, you can be put to jail and with no bail. So, I mean, this is the kind of space we're working on. And then even having an image of a kite or a lookalike kite in your home, in your space, you can be put to jail, right? So in a place where it's so politicized and so heavily monitored, we wanted to work with the craftspeople who are suffering the most. And then we brought in those conversations through the work to see where we can. We worked with Hegyu Yang, that's the artist we want to see. And we brought those objects that we made with him into public space, so the Shalimar Gardens, right? We continue to work with those craftspeople. So same with clay, same with all these other materials as well. And we're trying to build the follow-on reader that we will be working on will have all kinds of reflections on this as well. So that's what my response would be.
I'm just going to jump in and, address this question of pedagogy. We expect the place we are in to be a place where we learn. Museums also are sort of academic spaces in many ways. I think the real sort of interest for me in I think the space of curating and of artistic production are very much spaces of knowledge production and sharing. I think the part for me that's interesting is when pedagogy becomes uninstitutionalized, because something changes there. Like this, it can happen within an institution as well. is to sort of turn that on its head. But I think that outside of the kind of spaces of institutions, pedagogy can be much more radical and interesting and productive in many ways, and that is something that the space of curating is very much able to at least think about or explore. So I mean, in some ways, I see academia as a very different kind of pedagogy than what art or artistic or curatorial spaces of radical pedagogy could be. We have a question.
There's an online question that's been sitting for a while. Should we address that as well? Do you want me to just read out can generational trauma be addressed and worked through using art as a community building tool within public spaces and historic buildings that have played a role in our shared history? Is there a way of making these endeavors from the Lahore Biennale and Karachi Biennale have a lasting impact? And then feelings, can feelings engage with specific spaces through art as a way of healing collectively? Yeah, I mean, do either of you want to address that?
I mean, the generational trauma, sorry, I'm just going to say, is that I think some of that is what I was talking about with the Liverpool Biennial, because that is very much generational and across a very large group of people, that kind of trauma. And so I do think, I'm going to pull this question. Using art as a community building in public spaces. Yeah, so I think actually that biennial was attempting to do exactly that. And so I would say yes, that is possible, but I think it's really, that's a very specific kind of premise, and situated in a very specific kind of place, and therefore was possible there. I mean, I think that it was also kind of amazing that that project was accepted within, Liverpool or embraced by the biennial itself. And so I think that institutions, when they are involved, play a kind of pivotal role in what one can or can't do. Especially when it comes to ideas of public space, I think that audiences are less, I think that in Pakistan there's kind of idea that audiences are the difficult thing, that they're not going to get it, or, so on and so forth. But I think audiences are actually the interesting, productive, able to read or able to speak. If that time here, excuse. Okay, thank you. I think we are at right. Thank you. Yeah, you're on mute.
Thank you.
If that, so we're wrapping up now, right?
Yeah, we can, unless there are burning observations.
Is anyone burning?
No. Yeah,
No.
that's actually trying to get this
I just want to, well, before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you. Hold on, there's a question. Is there? Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
But not a burning question, but more of a burning observation. Someone who has been like part of what has been doing community organizing and thinking about what care looks like at least in my own practice, it comes off as ethical research, ethical methodology when you're talking about space.
Yeah.
Also, like what dissemination looks like as well. Comes under-
Yeah.
So yeah, but like these are still some things that I don't even have answers for. But then again, I feel like it has to be collaborative. It has to be, yes, these questions can be addressed within the white cube, but is white cube the best space to ask these questions?
No, I mean that's such a good observation, I think, and it's a really important one. As you can tell, my response to things is conditioned by a fundamental belief in not just resistance, but in a radical project of decolonization of institutions and of thought, right? So for me, in that thinking about this apparatus of research and methodology is very interesting, right? Where does it come from? What do we do with it? What sort of weapon are we making out of this? What sort of house are we making it? Right? What are we doing with it? Right? So yeah, I think it's the fact that it has to be collaborative shouldn't be a surprise. The work of colonialism or of class elite capture, all of these things are highly collaborative, right? They require generations of groups working together, each one doing their little bit. So the forces that bring us into this situation are extremely collaborative, and there's no way that we'll have some single heroic breakthrough change anything. So I think we have to think as collaborative as a kind of counter practice to imperialism, essentially, and epistemic imperialism, especially in our case in the academy. But yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was a good burning observation, I think. Yeah.
I think that was the last one.
Okay, well then I just want to say thank you, Zermina and Qudsiya, who's not here because iftar beckons. But yeah, thank you everyone who's here for really interesting questions. And it's nice to see these walls again.
You're missing one person.
Let me just come and say hello. Hi, Adnan.
The person
Hey,
who joined.
hey then. Great.
It's possible.
So it's really good.
Yeah.
Like, Zarmeena and Qudsiya. And in fact, one of the things when you guys were talking about pedagogy, like one of the reasons when the British Council puts some money is you also realize this becomes great spaces for learning, whether it's events or exhibitions.
Yeah.
And even exhibition, the idea of transience, right? Like we're always trying to capture information at the end of an event.
Yeah.
It's been really, really good to hear you guys. So glad you managed to do this session.
Well, thank you for having me. So yeah.
I'm trying to sit and listen quietly, but I thought let me come and say hello.
Well, no, I'm glad you did. It's such a pleasure to see you always.
Good to see you.
Okay.
Bye.
Well, bye everyone. Bye.
Fantastic.
It really was good. Thank you.